button so that we do save this for posterity's sake. And like I said, we're going to kind of focus in a little bit on Bar Harbor, about 75 minutes tonight from the New England FAASTeam. And you've heard from most of us already. Just one individual has gone on vacation this week. But here's 3 of the ops people and one of our terrific maintenance people. There's John and I with our contact information. John from the Portland FSDO, myself from the Boston FSDO, and then Dan Carter and Rob Leonard from the Bradley FSDO. So before we do get started, just some quick housekeeping questions that come up. Everybody always asks about the wings credit. We'll get them uploaded within just a few days, which is terrific. As long as you use the email address that you use in FAAStafety.gov, it'll automatically work through that. We probably will put this up on the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel. That usually takes about a week or so. There's also some interesting things you may find on there. We've been picking away slowly. We got a couple of them so far this year, but we've taken some of our webinars and other things and turned them into courses on FAAStafety.gov. Here in New England, the Alton Bay Ice Runway is always interesting, and we've done an annual webinar on that. That is course number ALC 671. And if you are interested in kind of the statistics and further insights on accidents in the New England area and more so in the Boston area, with the Aero Club of New England crash course that we held online for the first time this spring, that is also available as a course. That seminar usually is the largest single seminar in person with about 400 plus attendees every year. This past year we had to do it online, and we did take that and make it into a course. There's myself and also Richard McSpadden from AOPA on that course. Also, we do want to point out you should have a handouts tab available to you that you can download some handouts. These are not the actual ones for tonight. That's just an example, but we do have some there. And like I said, if you haven't seen the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel, do take a peek, subscribe, like. You'll find some interesting things there. And we got some projects we're going to be doing this summer that you'll start seeing up on there too. So looking forward to that. So just an overview of tonight, non-towered versus towered airport traffic pattern operations. We're going to focus on the non-towered. We're going to talk some about exceptions and rules of the traffic pattern. This is where we're going to put a lot of focus is on the legality of it, the safety of it, and the courtesy of it. Why? Because of collision avoidance. We don't want 2 pieces of aluminum trying to play tag in the air. That's not fun for anybody. Talk a little bit about radio communications and right-hand traffic pattern operations. And then we're going to talk more about legality, safety, and courtesy as pilots. And also just touch upon multiple runway airports. That always is a factor for us here in New England and around the country. So, we're all familiar with the traffic pattern. This may not be exactly what it looks like, but represents the rectangular pattern that we usually end up using. And it's an essential part of every flight. And sometimes what we do is we take just something as routine as the traffic pattern for granted. And, we don't want to be doing that. Sometimes we have less distance available. Sometimes we're working with many other aircraft in the area. And understanding what are the unusable portions and usable portions of a runway will help us if we're ever faced with that condition of forced landing and getting precise in our flying, because that breeds confidence and, hey, it makes you look good for the other pilots. There are airports out there that they're holding up the scoreboard as you do land from time to time. Now, like I said, we're going to focus in on Hancock County, Bar Harbor Airport here a little bit tonight. This is what we're going to use as our example. And you can take a look at it here. This is just what it looks like on the sectional chart, likely on Garmin Pilot or on your screen or ForeFlight. And then what is in the chart supplement, or what many of us still will mistakenly say, and if I do it tonight, please excuse me, saying the airport facilities directory, where there's a lot of information there. Couple things just to point out, to think about, is if you're calling on the common traffic advisory frequency, what you do want to do is use the name that you end up finding on the chart and also on the chart supplement, Hancock County, Bar Harbor. You know, that does help out because occasionally we end up with airports with near similar names, or I've seen this multiple places around the country where you have two airports basically in the same town, but on other sides of the town. And, you know, the last thing you want to do is end up in that situation that, you know, you have Sanford being called for both airports and people don't end up knowing. So you do want to be aware of that. It is interesting. It is associated with Bangor, which is up further, but there's the Ellsworth Falls visual waypoint. What's also different, we have a few airports like this around New England. Concord, New Hampshire, near where I live, is also another one that is like Hancock County, Bar Harbor, is it has this magenta dashed line, which tells us that we have class echo airspace, controlled airspace, all the way down to the surface. And if you pay attention over here, you'll notice that it doesn't say it's only active at certain times. Sometimes airports depicted like this for a few hours at night may revert to class G up to 700 feet, just like we see with the magenta shading here, where class echo begins at 700 feet. And then outside of that, it is class echo airspace, controlled airspace begins at 1200, and it is class Gulf, uncontrolled airspace down below. It's interesting to note this airspace in relation to the ocean and the fog. You know, this ends up having an impact on how you may be able to operate through there. Also, when you think about New England, the calm wind runway for this airport, if using runway 4 and 22, which is the most common runway to be used, the calm wind runway is runway 22. And that makes perfect sense because it's busier in the summer. And in the summer in New England, we tend to have more of a westerly, southwesterly flow than we do a northwesterly flow. And also that is the runway more closely aligned with a sea breeze that may end up developing at this airport, being right on the coast of Maine. Do notice the glider symbol for it. From what I understand, those activities are starting to dwindle at that airport. I don't know if that will continue off in the future. Also, what is interesting, I know it is in here, runway 4 and 22, due to a hump at the midpoint, opposite ends of the runway are not visible at ground level. You know, and this is why we want all the pilots to be checking all that available information ahead of time. If everybody's using runway 22 in calm wind conditions, it shouldn't be an issue. But, you know, there'll be that person someday, you know, hopefully never, but someone could attempt, oh, it's much closer to the parking runway 4, it's calm wind, and they'll try to go blasting off runway 4 when everybody else is using runway 22. Just don't want that. Also, what's interesting, common traffic advisory frequency is 123.0. However, I got to find it here. The lights are on 122.7. So you do want to be aware of that. Something to look out for if you're going to different airports. Not the type of thing that people always end up thinking about. Yeah, there we go. Right here, light, activate the approach lighting system, so forth and so on 122.7. So this is the airport we're going to be talking about. What I want to do is turn it over to John for a second. And why is it the airport we're going to be talking about, John?
Thank you, Steve. You bring up some really excellent points. And one of the issues that we've had going on at the Bar Harbor Airport for, you know, at least a couple of years now, and maybe longer. And this is not just unique to Bar Harbor. So as we talk through this tonight, be thinking about that, because this type of situation happens at other non-towered airports too. But at Bar Harbor, If you were to take the 30,000-foot view and you were to look down like a Google Earth view of that part of the state, you'll see that as you proceed northbound along the coast of Maine curves out pretty heavily to the east. It bends well to the east. And Bar Harbor sits about halfway through that bend. It's about a 3-hour drive north of Portland, maybe a little over an hour flight in U-172. And sitting on the coast like that kind of puts it, and sitting way to the east like that, kind of puts it in a position with the main runway being runway 22, and the direction that that faces. Most of the traffic, as Steve was pointing out, comes to that airport. Transit traffic coming to that airport is coming in from the west or southwest. And so from a traffic pattern point of view, where does that put them? It puts them in a position where it would seem that a right downwind or a right base would be the most expeditious and efficient way to enter the traffic pattern. It's not just a VFR problem, it's an IFR problem too. Just the routing that is used by Center and by Bangor Approach to bring IFR traffic into that airport brings them into the same position. So somebody coming in IFR, if they have the airport in sight and they cancel and proceed visually, they're in a position where if they were to do the most expeditious thing, it would be to enter right traffic for runway 22. And that's what's been happening. And that's why we have an issue. And certainly the airport manager isn't happy about it. We actually have one of our inspectors in the Portland FSDO who physically lives, his house is in the vicinity of the airport. And he sees the right traffic going overhead. Also, he's not happy about it either. But it also is contrary to 91-126, one of the regulations that we're going to talk about tonight, and presents a collision hazard. Steve pointed out there's glider activity at the airport. There's also student activity at the airport. There's also sightseeing activity. The airport's pretty close to Acadia National Park. You can kind of see that in the sectional chart, and Steve's highlighting it now. And that draws a lot of people, particularly during the summer. It's a beautiful airport. I mean, it's a beautiful location. If you were looking for a destination or a place to go, I mean, it's just a wonderful destination as a pilot. And certainly quite a few folks decide to go there. And at this time of year, the traffic count really increases. And throughout the summer and into the fall, it's pretty high. And so you have glider traffic, you have student traffic, you have sightseeing aircraft up there, you have a few Nordo aircraft, no radio aircraft, and they're all in left traffic for runway 22 because that's the authorized traffic patterns, left traffic for 22. And when traffic comes in on the right side, and again, it's a geographical and a kind of a structural thing because of where the airport's located and the way the runways align. When traffic comes in on the right side and decides to make right traffic, it not only operates, that's not only operating contrary to the reg, but it's creating a collision potential and is unsafe, an unsafe operating practice. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve, but I did want you to have a history of why we're talking about Bar Harbor Airport and why we're featuring Bar Harbor Airport tonight. So Steve, it's all yours. And Steve, are you there? Because if you're not, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Got to remember to click the microphone.
Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning Acadia National Park, because that is something I did want to mention and had forgotten about it before, but that may be a factor that leads people wanting to try to use that right-hand traffic pattern there. And this is the case for all the airports. In reality, the traffic pattern, unless it's established under Part 93 special traffic air regulations like you see down in Pensacola and some other parts of the country, is established by the airport manager. All that we are looking for from the FAA is that it is a safe and orderly manner. And I know one of the first questions that people may ask is, well, why don't you just make it, right-hand traffic pattern to runway 22? And that's something the airport manager here has brought up in the past, but, between the politics and other factors all associated with it, that basically has not come to fruition. Also, other airports in the area, like one of my kind of home airports, Laconia, tried swapping the runway pattern and found out that that didn't work quite as well as they were kind of hoping to after, a 15-year debate on it. But it is up to the airport manager, and they take the advice of the pilot community, the community around the airport, the FAA, and everybody else to establish the traffic patterns for the airport. Typical traffic pattern looks like this. This is a picture out of Chapter 14 of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. And I'm going to start here. There is the departure leg, commonly called, although you won't find it necessarily in all but very few FAA publications. Some old timers like myself will say upwind from time to time, but technically it is the departure leg. The crosswind leg, the downwind leg that parallels the runway, the base leg, and then the final. What I do want to point out is this is a left-hand traffic pattern, which is the recommended, and like John was saying, under 91-126 and above on the regulations is what is established for in non-towered, uncontrolled airspace. It should normally be left-hand turns within the traffic pattern so that everybody knows where to be looking for everybody else. Occasionally it's flipped for some reasons, which we'll look at, and it just would look like a mirror image. And here is an example, the segmented circle, and these indicators basically show what the base leg to final or the departure leg to the crosswind should look like for the appropriate lined runway. And you can see that is depicted here for this airport that has both of them. In the Aeronautical Information Manual, you'll have the classic black and white picture. Looks basically just about the same. What they end up doing is just show numbers versus putting the words right on it. And what you want to do is think about some of the dramatic differences in traffic patterns. It's this year, I was just listening to some stuff where, hey, maybe people are going to be flying back to Oshkosh and they operate a certain way. But if, the busiest airports operation-wise have a traffic pattern. Also, if you own your own little farm field that only you fly in and out of, you have a traffic pattern to it. But recognize that most airports all of us fly at lie somewhere in between these two extremes. So you don't want to treat every airport like Oshkosh, and you don't want to treat every airport like your own little personal farm field with it. With the tower controlled, you got to remember about 91-123, compliance with ATC clearances and instructions. For non-towered, you have to remember 91-126, which is operations in Class Gulf airspace. And believe it or not, look at the reg. It even talks about operating at an airport with an operating control tower in Class Gulf. It has happened. It does happen from time to time. And look at the regulations following that, 91-127, 129, 130. You'll notice the paragraph A of each of those regulations, it builds upon the previous reg. So 91-127 is for Class E, and it says, you must do everything in 91-126. So all I'm trying to do is, if you fly at a busy airport, don't be surprised that not everybody is doing 4-mile finals, or that everybody even talks on the radio. If you're flying at your own personal farm field all the time and you go to a busy airport, like Westfield, Bradley, Groton, don't expect to be able to, chop the power to idle right at being the touchdown point and just do a, little circle in down to the runway at power to idle. And depending upon the type of aircraft out there, there's all sorts of exceptions, whether it be rotorcraft that are out there, ultralights, gliders, even UAS drones now. Each of these play an important part. Is 91-111 talks about operating your other aircraft, and every pilot, it's incumbent upon them to operate not so close that they create a collision hazard. And that's something you could end up doing in the traffic pattern, if you're not giving adequate spacing and all of that. Right-of-way rules. who has the right of way. Rotorcraft helicopters and what is it, weight shift control, if I remember correctly. I'm going off of memory, so I may misspoke there slightly, but rotorcraft helicopters must give way to other aircraft. Unpowered aircraft, like gliders, end up having the right of way over powered aircraft, except an aircraft in distress. Drone pilots should know, that's in 107.37. Each small unmanned aircraft must yield the right of way to all aircraft, including airborne vehicles and launch and reentry vehicles. What's an airborne vehicle? Well, that goes back to the ultralights or ultralight-like aircraft, which Part 103 even has a regulation associated with it. It's 103.13 is yield the right of way to all aircraft. And powered ultralights must yield to unpowered ultralights. So there's a whole set of criteria. If you're operating in the traffic pattern, a whole bunch of regulations that actually do end up applying to this. And as you go to an airport like Bar Harbor or many others, Northampton is a terrific example, is it not, Dan? I mean, I know there's airplanes, I know there's gliders, there's very likely helicopters operating in and out of there, if not based there. And I would not even be surprised to see a drone in the area from time to time, or an ultralight that may fly in and out of there from time to time.
Yes, Stephen, I think you're right on all those.
Yeah, there's a terrific example, of what we end up seeing at the airports around New England. And, the airports themselves, many of them try to set up things to help you understand the traffic pattern. One of my home airports, located right next to the FAASTeam, is Bedford Hanscom, which it has the interesting aspect of it is it's basically located right next to a national park, the Minuteman National Historic Park. And that has its own whole set of criteria with it. In fact, the airport itself in Massport produces this flyer that is handed out to all of the students. It's on their website. You find it going through the terminal building. Is if you're going to be doing closed traffic pattern operations, what they're recommending that you're doing and how you end up doing that. And you'll find, they will tend to operate more on the runway 1129 because it fits in with the jets, but they'll almost always try to fit aircraft staying in the traffic pattern on that runway versus using 5 or 23, just so people are not crossing and climbing out over the historical park. And even other smaller airports can set things up a little bit differently. Another home airport of mine, I get a few of them out here in New England now, is the Franconia, where you have both gliders and powered aircraft. And this is just one of the things that we use. This is what we show the glider pilots on how they could or should normally set up for their landings. Is, runway 36 is kind of the classic traffic pattern entry on a 45, and then, left-hand turns in relation to it. And runway 18 is left turns, but they enter from the same general area, what's known as the IP, initial point. And you'll see that at airports that have glider operations at them. But like here, the airport manager had set up the patterns this way because it allows the ground crew that are launching the gliders to be able to see the aircraft inbound to runway 18. Otherwise, they'd be blocked by all these trees down here. And then to help separate that, if you look at the chart for that airport, you'll notice this little asterisk IP, or RP, excuse me, if I can get it flashing there for you, just to highlight it, is airplanes all enter the traffic pattern from the other side of the runway, the east side, and use the standard 45-degree entry for both of them. However, for runway 36, they will end up doing a right-hand traffic pattern. And that just helps in keeping those different types of aircraft separated. Now, you all know I work at the Boston FISDO, so I've had the joy of driving Route 128 quite often around Boston. And this is how most drivers in the cars seem to behave. But that is not the case. That's not what you want to do in the airplane. Because actually what it does do is degrade on the safety, and you can definitely see it. All you have to do is listen to the traffic report on any of the Boston news stations, and sometimes out in the Hartford stations or Portland, Maine stations too, about how much the traffic is backed up because of fender benders and people having accidents and all of that. What I want you to do is, instead of thinking about it and getting angry the way that some people do in their automobile, is try to think about what you're doing, not only in the traffic pattern, but in everything. But in the traffic pattern, this holds even more so. First and foremost, what you want to do is it safe? Is what you're doing increasing the safety for you and the others around you? Okay. You might think doing a right-hand traffic pattern is safer for you, but you may be degrading the safety for everybody else. That's first and foremost. Do what is safe, i.e. do what is right. 2, is it legal? I hate to say it, but our regulations are written in blood. We know all of that, the federal aviation regulations. That's why we have these regulations associated with operating in the traffic pattern and all of that. Is it legal? And then last but not least, before you move into anything else, is it courteous? If we would all just take the time to be courteous to our fellow pilot, I think you'll find that we'll avoid situations like that. In a simple way, what I'm getting at is, don't be that guy. Don't be that pilot. And all of us, we can flash back to, this is one of the challenges that maybe some of us have. But, remember when we were all a student? Most of us have been flying, the general population, since way back at the same time that this person was flying, it seems. And we've been there, we've done that. We've gone through the heat of the battle, whether it's actual battle or not, just maybe it's flying in and out of New York City, who knows? But a lot of us are in that situation, but we have to remember we're also flying with the students that are out there, that are brand new, that have not seen this before, that are trying to figure it out, that are being faced with these new situations. And that's why I'm saying, is it safe? Is it legal? And is it courteous? What? A student pilot may go out a bit far on their traffic pattern, further than you would like. They might end up putting themselves in a situation where they have to go around or are staying on the runway longer than you would like. It happens. We all are learning, no matter what level we're at, but we also are interacting with student pilots. And today, more than 10 years ago, we're interacting with more student pilots than we have. I don't think we've seen as many student pilots learning to fly since back in the time frame of when I learned, or even before that. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but all of you guys, you agreed the flight schools are just overwhelmed with the number of people that want to fly right now.
Yeah,
Oh,
Steve,
yes, absolutely, Stephen. Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, we even had some of our flight schools. During the COVID pandemic, Steve, I thought that the flight schools would have scaled way back, and I remember talking to a couple of them during the summer months when it was pretty bad, and they were saying that they were straight out. They were absolutely straight out. So there's a lot of interest in it. You're right. There's a lot of startups now.
Yeah, it really,
and
we're interacting.
The other thing is, Stephen.
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so the other thing is, everybody's like, okay, so COVID happened, and we knew the airlines were hiring. Then COVID happened. We thought, wow, that's really going to set us back. I've been talking to folks that are in industry and stuff, and the hiring is just picked right back up, and we're right back where we were much quicker than anyone anticipated.
Yeah, that is very true. I know a friend of mine whose son is a flight instructor, um, got hired by one of the regional airlines about a month ago. You know, he called me and said, "Hey, he's got an interview at." And I'm like, "Really? Already?" Yep. I mean, they're scoffing him up left and right, definitely. You know.
Yep. So we're going to be shorthanded for ops inspectors again. I'm just putting a little plug out there in case anybody's interested. Let me know.
Yeah, yeah, that probably fits for every FSDO. If you have ATP time, 1,500 hours, you know, you look up the details. A lot of FSDOs are looking for, you know, the few, the proud, the good ones. Yeah, but a lot of tonight, what we're talking about comes out of Advisory Circular 90-66 Bravo, which actually the original version only came out just a few years ago. You know, it's about non-towered airport flight operations. Before this, we actually didn't have all of this consolidated together well in any of our documents, manuals, handbooks, that sort of thing. And what you're going to see is as time progresses, the advisory circular and the handbooks, like I know they are working on an update to the pilot handbook of aeronautical knowledge. I don't know when it will be published. It still is off a ways, but you'll see them all start to marry up in terms of what they do say so that they're not contradicting each other as has happened in the past. But I also want to point out, which is the case with this advisory circular, but it's the case with all of them too. You can take a look at any draft advisory circulars at this website here. You can provide input. Myself and also some of my safety reps provided input in the original draft of this. I know I had 3 pages of suggestions, and I was pleasantly surprised. A lot of them took that information, you know, gave them some legal interpretations and everything, you know, and they changed things. Like there was some wording in there where they had the left traffic pattern is preferred, and they did change it to the left traffic pattern is required unless. You know, removed words like it are recommended and it's required unless authorized or required. You know, a lot of different things with it. Talking about lichen signals, visual markings, they changed. I was pleasantly surprised. They did a terrific job. They have amended it a couple times since then to the benefit, I think, of pilots, and we'll talk about one or two of those. Now, one of the things you don't realize, but we still have mid-air collisions. You know, we've seen one recently. I know I was working one just this past week. I've talked to the other FAASTeam program managers about it. But what is really interesting is some of the sobering statistics about it is the majority of mid-air collisions occur at or near non-towered airports, daylight, and with good visibility. Now you start thinking about that. Well, we operate under see and avoid. Shouldn't that be the opportunity where you get to see? Yeah, but the human eye and even the human brain and adjusting or synthesizing some stuff is not perfect. And also, this is when everybody is out at the non-towered airports on a Saturday in daylight, good visibility conditions. They almost always occur below 1,000 feet AGL. And believe it or not, more often than not, it's also when the aircraft are traveling in the same direction. And I've seen that personally a few times over the years. You know, this is not surprising because airports are the area where everybody starts to concentrate on. And there are 3 things that we can do to minimize these with it. One is be predictable, is fly the published patterns. Many of these are circumstances where people are not flying standard traffic patterns or have overflown legs of the traffic pattern, not using standard entry or exit procedures, that sort of thing. Be aware, look and listen. If you're familiar with it, if you fly instrument wise, monitor maybe approach frequency if you have the capability and the bandwidth to be able to do that. You know, if you are an instrument pilot approaching the airport, maybe instead of saying, you know, crossing Bayou at such and such, is saying at a 7-mile final or 7 miles to the northwest of the airport, so that other pilots will understand that a little bit better. And be proactive. Announce your position and your intentions of what you're doing. In fact, this is something you're not going to see in the advisory circular, but I've picked it up, and I tend to do this on both my high-end flying and my low-end flying, i.e., if you're flying in a jet in a crew environment, or if I'm flying my glider, you know, just out there for fun, because both of these are there. But if I'm coming to an airport in a crew environment, I might actually jump on quickly or ask the other pilot to jump on the common traffic advisory frequency when we're 10 or 15 minutes out, and just advise, you know, 551 Romeo Charlie is 10 minutes from landing of Hancock County, Bar Harbor. That way, you know, say they hear Learjet or something big, they now know and understand, oh, we got a jet that may be coming in. We don't see those here often. And they're about 10 minutes out. It can start to give some heads up to people about what's going on. It's the same thing in a glider. You don't have the engine to kind of keep you up. You're just relying upon the atmospheric conditions with it. And you may not be very far from the airport. You may be hanging out next to the airport at 3 miles for half an hour. So many times in my glider, the same thing is I'll make the call and say I'm, you know, 5 or 10 minutes out from landing, so that other people in the airport have an idea of what's going on. You know, a little bit more to think about it. And this is something we're dealing with in the Boston area, but, you know, not all aircraft are equipped ADS-B out. You know, it is required in almost all aircraft within the 30 mile. There are some exceptions to that rule. But just because an aircraft is ADS-B out doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see them well. We do have issues still with ADS-B systems that are not working appropriately, maybe that people have not found out about. You know, we are, the FAA, sending them letters as we do find out about it, but there are some things there. Also, if you're outside of areas where it's required, there's many more aircraft that don't have transponder ADS-B. And then also, if you're someone like me using a device like a Stratus, for lack of a better way to put it, you know, I'm kind of leeching off of other people traffic. You know, the system is set up that when somebody is ADS-B equipped, TIS-B information is being sent to them, and all I'm doing is receiving it. Doesn't mean that, you know, not all that often am I flying near enough a ADS-B out equipped aircraft. So we all need to look, listen for the traffic, especially in the traffic pattern area, all the time. You know, and hey, one more thing, these are out there now, and you might still be thinking it's an old rule, it's gone away, you know, where it was you couldn't operate drones or small or UAS aircraft within 5 miles of an airport. That is no longer the case. You know, they normally should be operating at 400 feet or below, but they can be operating very close to an airport. They are required, if they see an aircraft or whatever, to move the drone out of the way, land it, whatever else it may be with it. But we do end up occasionally hearing and dealing with drones conflicting with the airport operations. Now, in controlled airspace, they cannot fly unless they have gone through a certain system. Recreational flyers operating at a club, community-based rules and other things, they can operate. And then small UAS Part 107 operators can also operate, but there's what's known as the Lance system. And actually, the Lance system covers Bar Harbor also. Drones should not normally be operating in or around Bar Harbor. As I mentioned, below the 400 feet, they got to be outside the pattern. And we've done tests. We know they're difficult to spot. You basically can't until it's too late. But if you do see a drone flying near the airport, you know, you might want to kindly or maybe reach out to your safety rep about it. Is maybe just mention to the drone operator that it could be hazardous to the aircraft nicely. I emphasize there, courteously. And then if you're having more issues with it, you can go ahead and call the FAASTeam with a detailed description of the operation. And, you know, mid-air collisions cost. I was not involved with this one when it occurred, but I was involved with the cost ramifications after. And this is 2 aircraft on final that decided to play tag. The aircraft on top was a student pilot on a solo flight. They did survive. The aircraft on the bottom was a private pilot just out doing some practice takeoffs and landings, and horribly, he did not survive. And you know, you take a look at this, and what did this end up costing? In today's dollars, the settlement was approximately $900,000 for this. And guess what? There was no confirmation that really what pilot did anything wrong to cause this. Is, you know, at see and avoid, they both missed each other. And here's what the NTSB had in relation to it. Is the student pilot's failure to see and avoid the private pilot's airplane, student pilot's non-standard traffic pattern entry, which there was no evidence of it, but there had been an issue at that airport because many instructors and students had been entering the traffic pattern in a right-hand traffic pattern prior to that. And private pilot's failure to check for other traffic before turning on the final in the position of the sun. You know, but who's really at fault? Who knows? But it did end up costing, you know, a lot. And it ended up costing somebody that was looking forward to a promising career in aviation and ended up, I think, ultimately getting out of it. And I mean, even some other, this was a horrific one I dealt with. It happened right in front of me as I was flying. You know, a couple aircraft that ended up lost a fellow instructor I worked with along with 2 of his students with it. Basically 2 aircraft on final, both flying the traffic pattern, and one clipped the tail off of the other one, killing all 3. And all the NTSB had to say was, you know, failure of both pilots of both aircraft to see and avoid. And, you know, you got to remember in society, the problem with this is if you survive the accident and the other person doesn't, you're going to be viewed by society as being in the wrong, even if you were right, i.e. if it was the other person's fault with it. You know, we've even seen some of this recently. Thankfully, knock on wood, nobody was hurt or killed in this accident, but a horrific accident between a Cirrus and this Metroliner at a tower-controlled airport. That when this did occur, it does appear, I think it's out in the preliminary that recently came out, that it appears that one aircraft overshot the final and ended up colliding with another one. You know, what I go back to there is, are you operating safely? So if we break some of this down, the right-of-way rules, you know, except is we have regulation is landing. Aircraft while on final approach to land while landing have the right of way over other aircraft in flight or operating on the surface, except they shall not take advantage of this rule to force an aircraft off the runway. I.e., if you're on the runway, you own it. You may hear that from air traffic controllers. But also look, and this is some of the legalese aspect to it, is it says nothing about a low approach. You know, if you're out there maybe doing some practice instrument flying or whatever, it's if you're intending to land, not if you're planning on doing a low approach. And this is one of the things we end up seeing. What it comes down to is really the spacing is incumbent upon you, not the other pilot. You know, you can courteously work it out amongst yourselves. That's what a common traffic advisory frequency is for. But you are the one that has to maintain the spacing from the other aircraft. You don't have the other one maintaining the spacing for you. You know, and of course, when two or more aircraft are approaching for the purpose of landing, the aircraft at the lower altitude has the right of way, but shall not take advantage of it. And then there's some more rules. This is specific on Class Gulf airspace, which is what most non-towered airports are in. However, it does apply to Bar Harbor, which we'll see here in just a second. As first and foremost, directions of turn. Is each pilot must make all turns of that airplane to the left unless the airport displays approved light signals or visual markings indicating that turns should be made to the right, in which case they should make the turns to the right. And then, as I mentioned, each pilot of a helicopter or powered parachute, I said weight shift before, sorry. It is powered parachute to avoid the flow of fixed wing aircraft with that. So that's what we're expecting. Now, there have been legal interpretations. You know, people say, well, what about the 45-degree leg where you're entering the downwind? Isn't that a right turn? And the legal interpretations there, to put in a thumbnail sketch, have said that is maneuvering to get established in the traffic pattern. As a result, that is okay. But once established in a traffic pattern, all turns should be made to the left. And how is that signified? Well, there's markings. This is the segmented circle at Bar Harbor. You'll actually notice that there's no base leg indication on any of these, which tells us that all of these, by ICAO standards, are standard traffic patterns with left-hand turns with it. And correct me if I'm wrong, John, I know you've talked to the airport manager a lot lately. Isn't this something that they're going to be redoing at Bar Harbor this summer? Construction?
Yeah, they are. You're correct, Steve. From what he told me, they've already placed the order for a new segmented circle to go in there that will have the little dog legs on it, just so that there's no question in anybody's mind.
Yeah. The ICAO standard is not to have them unless it is a right-hand traffic pattern. And what it indicates is if you look at, again, this is a picture I took out of an airplane at one of my home airports here, where runway 36 for airplanes is a right-hand traffic pattern, the base leg indicator and the final indicator. In reality, this, if it met ICAO standards, should have this leg here, that there, and that there, but shouldn't have these two indicators with it. But however, the smaller the airport, the less likely it's going to be that it meets ICAO standards. And especially as you get into the smallest airports, many of them are privately owned, open to the public, such as this one. So you're going to find things that don't necessarily meet ICAO standards. An old thing you might hear from time to time, it's been 20 years since I've heard it myself. And the last document I saw that had it in it was back from the 1980s. But there is an old document, and you'll hear from some people, if you had an amber light that was put on top of the windsock at night, it indicated right-hand traffic patterns. Now, that was the challenge, is which ones are right-hand traffic patterns? Now what you're almost always going to see on top of a windsock at an airport is a red obstruction light along with the 4 white lights shining on it. Now, we mentioned Class Gulf airspace, but Bar Harbor is Class Echo, and this is where the rule comes in, and I've highlighted it here. It's the first paragraph says, you know, Each person operating an aircraft on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class E airspace must comply with the requirements of 91-126, which is for the Class Gulf. So you have to do basically everything that's required of Class G, airports in Class G, you have to do if you're flying at an airport in Class Echo airspace, like Bar Harbor or Concord, or the few and far between. But then we go on to 91-129, which is Class Delta, and then it says each person must comply with 91-126 and 127. That series of rules on operating in an airport in airspace all build upon each other. And this is one of the things that you recognize. One thing that is a little bit different here is 91-126 and 91-127 do not specifically mention the minimum altitude for the traffic pattern of a turbine-powered aircraft, whereas 91-129 does, that it needs, that a turbine-powered aircraft, turbojet, needs to maintain at or above 1,500 feet AGL until basically they're in a continuous descent to landing. Most jet operators will do the same thing at airports at Class Echo and Class Gulf, even if it is not indicated by the airport manager, not indicated by the chart supplement, just to provide that extra spacing. You know, when you come out there, you want to call your shots according to the AIM. This is what you should put out there for your radio calls, when you should be making radio calls. I'll highlight here in the AIM still, but it has been changed in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge and other places. These two, they use Unicom versus traffic in the example call signs. But the advisory circular 9066 Bravo uses traffic in all of the examples. In the handouts, you might even see from AOPA what they recommend. And you basically will see here, almost all of these are recommended by the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge also, but they recommend turning crosswind. And that's something in terms of a practice that I've picked up myself over the years. You know, maybe that's a good thing to debate for that group together down in Northampton. Is it helpful to call the crosswind? I tend to think that it is, but that's just my personal pilot opinion there. Entering the pattern, which they say to call 10 miles out initially. I also had mentioned what you'll end up seeing on some examples is giving a time associated with that too. Not only a location, but a time. And that can help other people work with you to work you into the pattern. Downwind base, final. Also, you do want to mention whether it's a full stop, touch and go, or stop and go. That can help the person behind you adjust their spacing. And you should also call when you are clear of the runway with it. Now, this is something that changed between version A and version B of the advisory circular. And I do like it because the intent is to keep people from hitting each other. And, you know, it talks about who are you. The way the AIM has been set up and also the original version of the advisory circular, and I give you this example here, should be Skyhaven traffic, Roland and Schneider, November 771 Hotel, entering left downwind runway 36, Skyhaven. You know, to the uninitiated that doesn't recognize aircraft like this, you're like, who? What? You know, you got where, but you don't know what you're necessarily looking for in relation to it. You know, and most gliders actually have competition numbers like you'll see on this one here. So one of the things that I tend to do as a practice, and I think it helps other pilots in a courtesy wise. And this is what the change to the advisory circular said is, you know, a description of the aircraft is the best, most useful thing in the collision avoidance. As if, say, hey, Skyhaven traffic, White Glider, Tango Hotel, entering left downwind runway 36, Skyhaven. Now, that's much easier, as it differentiates between these two aircraft. And then also you can see the competition number on it is much, much larger. If they're close enough to read anything, they're going to be able to read that, not the 3-inch letters down here on the tail. So something that does help, and that was a recent change to the advisory circular. If you're departing the pattern, blasting off, just like this former FAA inspector in the airplane that he built, yes, that is his aircraft that he built upon retirement, is if you're staying in it, you want to turn within 300 feet of the traffic pattern altitude. The normal traffic pattern altitude is 1,000 feet AGL, but not always. And if you are departing, continue straight out or a 45-degree turn in the pattern direction, i.e. left pattern, left 45-degree turn, but beyond the departure end of the runway and after crossing the pattern altitude. What I actually recommend to people is go at least 500 feet above the traffic pattern or patterns for that airport before making any additional turns. You know, you'll see people turn the 45 and fly, you know, just 100 feet of climb and then crank it around and fly right back over the airport and end up almost cutting off people on the entry and stuff like that. I personally suggest getting 500 feet above the traffic patterns. You know, and here's a good example. This kind of fits why it's good to talk on the radio, but not all aircraft have radio controls. This is the web link to it, but I'm going to go ahead and show the first part of this little video for you. And this is what like a hump in the runway can do to you. We'll see if it gets to go. It's loading up. Thinking. You should have an individual player that you can hit play on your end. So if you got to see that, I know not everybody may have a strong enough internet to be able to see it. And this is the website that you can go and take a look at. It's right in the beginning, but looked a little close to me, didn't it? I think I would be doing some laundry if I was the pilot in either of those aircraft. All right. Give me 1 second, just because it's messed up my spotlighting tool. We will try this again. Just give me one quick moment. Let's go. Let's try this. There we go. We're now back in the game. Excellent.
Yes, Steve, we're still not seeing your screen.
Let's.
There you go.
There we go. Excellent. That's probably why. I was sitting there thinking. Now I'm up to the audience view is doing fairly well. Some airports have right patterns. A few years ago, we started adding on the sectional charts this RP indication. Many times what you'll see is RP 19, which tells you it's a right-hand pattern for runway 19 for this airport. Here, right-hand turns, and then runway 1, the opposite way would be left-hand turns. What they're basically trying to do is keep all of the traffic on the west side of this particular airport. Other airports, and this is common, I get asked this, this is one of those that it surprises a lot of people, even though it's been out for a few years. But this asterisk RP, what does that mean? And what that means is that there are limitations associated with the traffic pattern in a right-hand traffic pattern. For this particular airport, if you were to go look at it, it's right-hand pattern for fixed wing to remain west of the runway using a right-hand pattern on runway 16 and a left-hand pattern on runway 34, and rotor wing to remain east of the runway using 34 right-hand pattern and 16 a left-hand pattern, doing almost the same identical thing, just about, as this airport, but it's depicted a bit differently and clearly spelled out exactly why they're doing it in the chart supplement. The standard pattern entry is on the downwind side of the 45, but in the advisory circular, you'll see other descriptions like flying over, descending well away from the traffic pattern. I do use the 2 miles at least as a minimum myself, descend to the traffic pattern and enter. Cross over 500 feet above it, fly clear, turn on to the 45 and establish. Or there's also recommended on the upwind side is another way. This is actually kind of a way that Canada has been doing it when approaching the airport from the opposite side for years. The US is now picking up on this to cross at traffic pattern altitude, yield, and join the downwind leg. I will readily admit I have been known myself personally to do a bit more, is instead of flying directly over the airport, to give more spacing, more time to join a bit further up on it. And what is interesting, if you think about New England here, everybody arrives at the airports from the southwest and departs to the southwest, it really seems. If you look at the traffic flow, because we're tucked way up in that northeast corner, everybody's coming in from the southwest and then ultimately departing to the southwest. I think the only exception to that is Nantucket out there. With students, if you use paper charts, here's a little thing that I used to do with my students, is to help them understand how to establish, instead of going over and flying directly over an airport where there may be other aircraft, parachutists, all of that, is if they know what the wind is, or they can do it for the multiple runways. I would have them mark something like this. If you just draw an extended line at a 45-degree angle off of the runway and go like 4 or 5 miles out and find some prominent point out there that you can fly over, and you can mark it just right in pencil, runway 22, and like up here, runway 4, up by this tower, and there's actually an intersection with a river and stuff like that. Now, if you're coming to this airport from far away and they're using runway 22, instead of going over the airport, circling around, trying to figure it out, and as a student, you're learning, how do I get set up? If you're out here, runway 22, I'll just fly straight to this point. And then if I turn directly at the airport, I'm basically set up on a terrific little 45-degree leg. And things like Garmin Pilot, many of us aren't using paper charts all that much now, but Garmin Pilot 4Flight, like I use, you have the opportunity to put it in. And it's real simple. It's right up here in the procedure portion of your flight plan. You click on it and it'll tell you which runways are preferred with what the current wind conditions are. In this case here, it was runway 22. And, it's defaulted traffic pattern altitude is in there, but then it also gives you the entries that you want to do, or it suggests in relation to it. So in this one here, I picked the classic 45-degree entry, put it in. You can see it puts it in the flight plan in relation to it, and then ends up putting it on the chart so that you now have something you fly directly to, and it gives you an example of what it looks like. Traffic pattern altitudes do vary. Propeller-driven aircraft are typically 1,000 feet AGL. Large and turbine-powered airplanes, as I mentioned, are normally 1,500 feet AGL or 500 feet above the established traffic pattern. I mentioned that with the regulation 91-129. Rotorcraft and ultralight should operate no higher than 500 feet or AGL feet below the powered aircraft pattern altitude. And not all aircraft or all airports are the same. You know, here in New England, you don't see, like you do down in Florida, a lot of 800-foot traffic patterns. That was an old standard many, many years ago before I even started flying, but for some reason it got held over in the flat country of Florida, so there's still a lot down there. But check out Whitefield, New Hampshire. Take a look at what it has in the chart supplement for the traffic pattern altitude, and then take a look at the sectional. Start thinking about it. You'll understand why. And another one that's interesting in New Hampshire or in New England is Portsmouth, Pease, Papa Sierra Mike. Take a look at that one. Whitefield is Hotel India Echo, and Pease, Portsmouth, is Papa Sierra Mike. You know, also recognize a pilot may vary the size of the traffic pattern depending upon the aircraft's performance characteristic. That's kind of almost a given. Now, if we talk about straight-in approaches, VFR or IFR, by regulation, technically who's on final has the right of way, but there's no distance limit. And there have been cases where, you know, 4 more mile-long final approaches, they have considered not to be established on final. You know, that it was people taking advantage of the rules associated with it. You know, the advisory circular gives you some suggestions, but remember the right of way only matters, you know, when there's a conflict. Everybody has the responsibility for see and avoid. You know, if somebody else is doing straight-in approaches or things you can do, if you've decided it is your best option in the interest of safety, legality, and courtesy, is the lights on before turning base? You know, check visually, electronically maybe, but don't keep your head buried in the screen, of course. Be looking outside. You know, extending your downwind might be safer. I have been known to adjust the speed that I fly a traffic pattern as working at operations like Bedford, where, you know, many jets are coming in. We'll ask them, you know, the tower controller, you want me to give you extra time and slow it up? Oh, that'd be great. You know, you can be courteous. If you're doing a straight in, you know, make sure you're coordinating on the common traffic advisory frequency, the lights on. Be aware that there may be no radio planes, especially at the smaller airports. And that's what the challenge is at airports like Bar Harbor, is you go everywhere from Nordo aircraft all the way up to business jets, all trying to operate in and out of the same airport. You know, so here's my kind of personal suggestion to it. Is it your own private airport? If it is, go have fun. Do the traffic pattern however you want. You know, it's your airport, you own it. But if you're going to another airport and there's others in the traffic pattern, and you're operating what I would call a typical GA aircraft, you really should be joining the pattern, because it's likely that there's Nordo aircraft out there, or maybe even varying aircraft operations. And, you know, you want to make sure you understand the flow and you're part of the flow, not contradicting it. You know, what it comes down to, I've said it before, and I picked this up from a safety rep of John's, and I've used it for years, but I cannot emphasize this enough. Always be thinking about, is it safe? Is it legal? And is it courteous? If you operate in that context in the traffic pattern, you're going to do all right. And, you know, if you're going to be doing a straight-in approach, not saying that you can't in the advisory circular, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. You know, doing it for convenience for you is not the right reason. You know, it needs to be something that is improving the safety of the airport, is maintaining the legality, and gives you the opportunity that you're trying to be as courteous to the other pilots in that traffic pattern as you can be. You know, like I said, you don't want to be that guy that hassles everyone else for your convenience. You know, if it's a corporate jet that I'm going into at an airport like Bar Harbor, and especially if I've never been there and stuff, I'm probably going to do a straight-in approach using the approaches, but I'm going to do some other things like maybe call the 10 or 15 minutes out just to give everybody a heads up and, you know, kind of planning to do the ILS runway 22 in relation to it. I'm probably going to make some extra calls with it to try to give people the opportunity to mix in well with the jet. And that kind of brings me to a couple scenarios that we have here, a couple poll questions for tonight. And these are always good for debate, but say you're coming up from Boston and your citation, it's your first time and the weather's 2,500 broken and overcast with 7 miles and there's 4 aircraft in the pattern. How do you decide to come in and land? And if you are curious, this is what a typical routing may look like coming out of Boston, heading up to the Kennebunk VOR or a waypoint up there, and then continuing direct to the airport. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that poll question. I'll launch that. And let's see what you think. There is no specific right answer to this. We have about 90 people out there joining us. What do we got here? We're a little bit more than 50% have voted. Vote early, vote often. We'll give it just a couple more seconds. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share it, and I'm not necessarily going to give an answer to it, but I'm going to ask Dan, John, others, what do you think about the answers? Do you like what some people answered? Do you not like what some people answered, and why? I'll close it. We'll share that. And it looks like most people said doing the 45-degree entry to the runway 22 and 35% saying joining the visual on the RNAV 22 to the final. Few also. I am surprised by the 15% saying straight into runway 4 in calm wind conditions. Do you like that one, John?
Yeah, I know, I'm surprised at that too, Steve. You know, runway 22 is a designated calm wind runway at Bar Harbor, and I think that we were kind of assuming with the question that people would be using the calm wind runway, which was 22.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit surprised by that also. Now that would, especially where you brought up at the beginning that you know, there's a hump in that runway. Now, granted, traffic coming in to land on runway 4, if somebody's sitting out there in 22 getting ready to depart, should be able to see the traffic because it's up in the air and the hump in the runway isn't going to matter. But nonetheless, if somebody were to land on runway 4, especially some type of a STOL aircraft that could land on 4 and slow the aircraft down considerably, you could have that type of a conflict with somebody taxiing onto 22 at that point. And now you've got somebody who's landed on 4, somebody who's departing runway 22, and the hump would matter. You wouldn't be able to see the traffic.
Yep. Yeah. And, you know, that's all from the safety perspective. The next level in relation to it is the legality, is that you probably would be contrary to pre-flight planning actions in relation to it. You probably also would be looked at as operating in a careless and reckless manner, given that that information is there and available. And then last but not least, from the courteous side, there's 4 others in the traffic pattern, that probably do know runway 22 is the calm-wind runway, and that is not going to be courteous to them. Not only not safe, but also not courteous to them. And kind of the same thing for the right downwind for runway 22. Both of those are the 2 that would catch my attention. Let's go on to the next one. I'm going to hide that if I can. And we are seeing the screen. We'll go on. Got another poll question here for you. Same thing, you're going to Bar Harbor, but this time you're doing a short little one from Bangor, right near what's known as A sign or intersection, which is Route 1. It's 2,500 foot ceiling. ATC tells you no reported traffic between you and the airport, but on the common traffic advisory, you hear that there's 2 in the traffic pattern, and the weather is better than 5,005. And same thing, it's calm wind runway or calm wind conditions there. How do you decide to approach and land the airport? Again, this is what it may look like on your chart. Just pretty much a straight shot. You're coming pretty close to a 40 or 90 degree to the center line of runway 22 and 4 on this. So I'm going to go ahead and share that next one. If you would, vote early, vote often. Like I said, we got about 90 people out there. So far, it's looking like some people listened to what we said on the last one.
I like it when it works that way, Steve.
Yes, it is. It is. And I threw in a couple other options. There's runway 17 and 35 at this airport also. So that's there and available. All of these present their own little possibilities or challenges with it. So we're getting to the point. I'm going to go ahead and close this with it and share it with everybody so that you can see. Most people said, yeah, I'm going to go south of the airport and set up on the 45-degree entry, which is the most common way that we espouse how it should be done in entering the traffic pattern. We had 23%, so almost everybody was saying, crosswind entry on the left downwind for runway 22 with it, which is a fine way to do it also. We had somebody mention left downwind to runway 35, which may work. I'm going to mention one thing there. Somebody mentioned the right downwind or 4%. I don't know if it's A or multiple right downwind for runway 22. And again, the same thing as we mentioned the last time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm just going to mention one thing here. One thing just to consider if you do decide to enter the left downwind for runway 35, 2 factors which don't show very readily here. But one is you're going to be turning your base leg downwind to base probably just at the same point that other people are starting to enter the normal left downwind. So you might end up creating some traffic conflict there. The second thing is these runways actually do cross on the ground at that point. So you are kind of getting into a little bit of a situation with this shorter runway. If you use up the entire runway length, that you could end up crossing the runway that somebody else is using. I know if I was a pilot fitting in the flow of traffic and using runway 22, I'd be a bit nervous watching somebody land on runway 35. Not saying that it's wrong, but from the courtesy aspect, it would catch my attention there. Entering the right downwind to runway 22, we're sitting here talking about this tonight because we've had the issue, John, at this airport, and we've all had it. And we're trying to do some outreach. You have a lot of other things that you're doing out there, but if it doesn't start to change with the outreach, what ends up being the follow-up that the FAA ends up following? You know, is somebody doing line inspection stuff says, "Hi, I'm from the FAA and I'm here to help you today as I watch you enter the right downwind." Not going to be a good day for you with that. And not all the other pilots will really take kindly to you on that, will they?
Yeah, it really, you know, I love what you say about, you know, is it courteous? Because, you know, that's kind of the final thing, right? Is it safe? Is it legal? Is it courteous? And that was one of my reps, John Light, who brought that out. And I, you know, outstanding rep, and really have to thank him for that, because he's given us a talking point that is a very salient and important talking point. And but you're absolutely right, Steve. Is that you know, is that the courteous thing to do? And so those other two examples that you just showed, also, you know, something else that occurred to me, a couple of things that occurred to me. One of them is that, you know, you have a low time and experienced pilot in the traffic pattern, especially with only a couple of aircraft in the traffic pattern, and suddenly somebody comes in and uses a different runway, and you might throw some confusion into that person's mind. I mean, an experienced pilot may start thinking, well, wait a minute, maybe they're switching to runway 35, maybe they're switching to runway 4, maybe I should do that. And now suddenly, you know, the whole pattern becomes a little chaotic. The other thing is, you know, when you're talking about, you know, operating contrary to the regs, I don't know if a lot of people really realize, a lot of pilots realize that, you know, the technology that we have today, many non-towered airports, probably eventually most non-towered airports, will have the ability to record the CTAF frequencies, and many of them are doing it already. And not only record CTAF, but some of those airports also have the ability to record ADS-B data. So now you have CTAF data that's recorded and ADS-B data that's recorded, which can be overlaid on a, you know, Google Earth photo or some 30,000 foot view, and you really have kind of a history of how that pilot operated in that traffic pattern, and should anything go wrong, and should there be a situation where two planes come together or come close to coming together, you know, that may be something that you know, a pilot wouldn't want to have out there. You know, so there are many reasons why you should operate, certainly for safety reasons and for regulatory reasons, but also we exist in a era in which Big Brother is watching, and that type of technology is there. Yeah,
it makes it a lot easier, I hate to say, for the person that has to do the paperwork when it's laid out for them with ADS-B data and the radio communications data, and are able to marry them up. It definitely does, you know, and it is. We don't want to. Having to use the enforcement aspect is the last thing any of us want to do in the FAA. But if the problem doesn't resolve itself by how all of you are operating out there, that's the next level that, you know, the FAA management ends up doing. And, you know, if they're out doing ramp checks because of right-hand traffic patterns, how many other things do you think they're going to end up finding? You know, it just isn't a happy day for anybody if it gets to that point. You know, some people talk about, well, what if people are entering the traffic pattern wrong and all of that and so forth and so on. The big thing is always, you know, no matter what level or type of flying you do, be the professional pilot. And you actually do have some people, the safety reps, that can help you with this. You know, it really, first and foremost, is the airport manager and that sort of thing. Now, I know some people will advise, I'm kind of indifferent to it, but I would not necessarily jump all over it. I hear people, you know, multiple people saying things on the radio from time to time. But if you got somebody that's coming in and kind of blasting into the traffic pattern, not doing it safely, not doing it legally, not doing it courteous-wise, you know, maybe a pilot saying something like, be advised, runway 22 is left traffic at XYZ. There's 6 aircraft in the traffic pattern, and just leave it at that, you know, because we're not the pattern police. All of us have kind of different traffic patterns. And as the FAA, we don't want to be the pattern police, but if we're put in the situation that we have to, we will end up being it. If they're not flying the traffic pattern the way you want to, that's your problem, not theirs. It's incumbent upon you to maintain the spacing. So, so if that's the issue, you need to kind of keep it zipped. You don't need to, and when you have airports that have multiple runways like Bar Harbor here, you really want to have the discussion on jets, crosswind practice, and all of that. And I know it happens at non-towered airports, but wrong runway alignment. We're having the issue at Bedford. We're having it at Burlington, Vermont, and I'm sure it's happening at non-towered airports left and right. And some of these are just downright scary. I would suggest you maybe take a look at the video series from the flight deck, which we have for the Bedford Airport, is one of the ones that is out there. This is where you can find those with it. And, I do want to thank you for joining us and hoping that you're able to help expand your horizons and that you're a proficient pilot doing annual checking and being involved in an organization with either the Wings program or reach out to your local Wings Pro. Tonight here, you've joined us for kind of part one of the Wings program. We want to thank you for doing that. But there is also part two, the flight side to it. And I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of that also. Do recognize with the Wings program, there is a $10,000 sweepstakes that is out there. And we've had a few people win here in the New England area, which is absolutely awesome. Here's some of the references that we did end up using tonight, and then some more above and beyond that to it. So I do want to thank you for attending tonight. And this is our contact info here for the New England FAASTeam if you want to reach out to any of us. We'll stay on for just a few more minutes to answer some questions that you may end up having, but you do not have to stay on. We are at the end of the presentation for this evening. So you can go ahead and close out. You will get Wings credit and everything, but if you want to stick around for a few minutes with the questions, feel free. So do want to thank you.